Hello and welcome to another episode of Guess That Record. I am your host, Jackson Reed. This is the show where we talk about music and try to figure out which album I pulled from my collection. Thanks once again for tuning into another episode. It's been a great start to 2024 here at Guess That Record, and we're going to keep that momentum going with today's guest. He's best known for serving as the drummer for Billy Joel, a role that he's held since 2006. He's also worked with artists such as Hall Oates, Meatloaf, Rainbow, and Blue Öyster Cult. I'm super excited to be speaking with Chuck Burgi. How are you doing, Chuck?
I'm recovering from a lot of journeys that we've taken in the last couple of weeks, but other than that, I'm doing well. We were in Japan for a week. Then we flew back, landing hours before we took off, because when you cross the date line, it's horrifying.
Right.
We landed in LA. We were there for 2 weeks to rehearse, for the Grammys, got really comfortable with LA time, and then flew home. And then I think all of us were hit with a combination of Japanese jet lag and West Coast, which, even though it's only 3 hours, is sufficient to turn you completely around.
For sure.
I'm pretty good. I'm starting to get on the schedule that I normally am here.
That's good, yeah. And where are we talking to you from today?
Talking to me from my little studio. It's kind of a mess. I haven't really worked in here in quite a while. I used to do a bunch of recordings with a band I was with called Tokyo Motor Fist. And I'd like to get set up so I could do more interaction with other artists. But I have an almost 100-year-old mother who is in a facility about a half an hour from here. And she's pretty with it. And I'm the only real caregiver in the family. I split my duties with my brother, but he is in and out of town all the time. So since getting her up into my neighborhood, I really haven't spent more than a few hours in this place.
Right.
So I'm in my little studio here.
That's great.
Yeah. Festooned with all sorts of Christmas lights because it doesn't have any windows. I don't get any natural light in here or any sunlight.
Well, it's good. It's good for the vibes that way.
Yeah. Well, I used to work a lot at a studio near here, probably about 45 minutes from here, called House of Loud. And they recorded tons of very cool albums. And I started doing sessions there. And they hung Christmas lights all on the wall as well. And I stole the idea from him, thinking, better than nothing. And as they burn out, you can change them out with other bright colors. But it's all Christmas lights. So it's easy to kind of got a Mexican restaurant vibe, but anyway, so that's where I am today, and it's about 30 degrees. Now, where are you calling from?
I'm in Calgary, Alberta.
Oh, so, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it must be nice and chilly up there.
Well, it's weird because at the start of January, we had like a crazy cold snap. It was like minus 30 Celsius every day for a week.
Wow.
But since then, it's been about like, zero for the last little while. And that feels like summer compared to minus 30. So
yeah, I hear you. We haven't gotten really below, the zero or even the single digits in about a month. And with that, we only hit one day. So I think it was 13 degrees, which that's like Miami for you guys.
Yeah, exactly. So it's great to have you on the show today because I'm a huge Billy Joel fan. So it's like mind blowing for me to be speaking with someone from his band. But, in doing research for the interview, it's also been cool to discover that you've had an amazing career outside of your work with Billy. So it's really great to be speaking with you today.
Thank you.
And
my pleasure. And I have been blessed to, to manage to fall into situations that I never thought were going to happen.
For sure.
Kind of being in the right place at the right time. I think living where I grew up, which was about 15 miles from Manhattan. And even as a kid, I could take a bus in to familiarize myself with the place. And just being in proximity to New York City had a lot to do with me meeting some of the right people to keep working and to join some of the bands I've joined. So it's been pretty amazing.
Yeah, for
Very,
sure.
very blessed.
Now, I always love to start out by asking, what was the first song or the first album that you remember hearing that made you take music seriously?
Man. I've talked about this actually. To digress for a second, we did a show last week with Billy at the Garden. It's the 99th show, I believe. And it ended up being on the night of the anniversary of the Beatles playing on Ed Sullivan for the first time. So I saw that, and so did Bill, and so did most of the people in the band. Actually, there's only one other person who was my age, so we both saw it actually the night that it happened. Other people saw it in reruns, but that's where it really, for me, it changed my life. Up until that point, my father and mom were music aficionados. We had a drum set around the house, but I never really took it seriously. And my dad really didn't know that much about drums. He just loved farting around on them, and and kind of showed me what little chops he had. But I wasn't motivated. And then, literally that night with the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, that was it. And I think I went out and bought All My Loving, which was the first song I think they sang. We
Hmm.
actually played that with Billy as well. And then maybe She Loves You or something like that was the second song. They did two songs, and I should know that. But I was immediately captivated by rock and roll and saw that that was a viable alternative to the um, delinquent trajectory I was on. I was up to just trying to find a place to channel my youthful exuberance.
Right.
Most of the time, it was ringing doorbells and running, or wrestling. I had a couple of friends that were trained in martial arts, and they were studying it, and we would get together and try and take them down, and spend hours doing that until we were exhausted, and I can go home and have dinner or something.
Right.
But
Yeah.
anyway, music hit me between the eyes when I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and
Yeah.
then
No,
that was it.
it's amazing because I'm a musician myself, and the Beatles were like the band that got me into it as well. And it's like I've met a few people who saw Ed Sullivan, and the world changed for them. And it's funny how I was that was probably about 40 years after that when I got into the Beatles, and it's
Good.
they're
And
still
you look about 10, Jackson. So
25, but
wow, oh, God, I'm closer to three times your age. Oh my God, that's wild. But
yeah,
it's beautiful because it's still probably the best band in the world, in
yeah.
terms of compositions, in terms of the talent, in terms of the singing, the lyrics. Oh my God. So, yeah.
Yeah. Now you mentioned that you had a drum kit at home. Was it did you always want to be a drummer, or were there other instruments you looked at?
My folks, we had a stand up piano as well.
Hmm.
Uh, and my folks, when I was, maybe third grade, fourth grade, made me take piano lessons for a while. But I ended up just learning the stuff by listening to it, and I hated reading. It just wasn't the right time for me to have grown to love keyboards. I love them now. I don't know anything really about them. I can mess around. I can play in the keys that I like and that I write. But yeah, it wasn't even music really. I was around music. My folks used to have jam sessions on the weekends uh, from the earliest days of I could remember. But my dad was a stockbroker. My mom was a homemaker, raising three boys and a girl. And their next door neighbor played in a wedding band. So when he was done with his weddings, he would bring some of his crew over to their house and they would set up and mess around. So that was it. Like I said, my dad loved big band. I was around music a lot, but I never took any of it seriously until I saw the Beatles. And
Mm,
that was it. Bam.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, and I thought for a very short period of time that I might want to try bass, but we didn't have a bass. I mean, Paul McCartney to me was just such a god. And But so second tier was the drums, and I started. Well, there's no bass here, but there is a drum set, and I started listening to Ringo, and that was it. And I was completely captivated by it.
Yeah.
And you have to realize, back then it was the presentation of an alternate job, right? It was like, here's a job description, boys and girls, you've never seen.
Yeah.
And my parents and all the post-war kids that grew up, Elvis, it was kind of like Elvis and then the Beatles. And Elvis was weird and cool for those people that loved him. But for my age, once I saw the Beatles, it was just like, well, there's a job description that looks so much fun. And I was captivated. I couldn't go back. I could not see my future any other way, but I have to do that. I have to find a way to do that. So that was the motivator. And I know that I speak for a lot of people my age who went through exactly the same thing.
Yeah, of course.
It was
Now, while we're talking about your sort of formative years in music, what can you tell the listeners about Joe Walsh?
Oh man, well, so Joe, he was he was a junior in high school when I met him, and he lived literally about a mile from my folks' house. He was born in Nebraska, I believe, but moved to Montclair, New Jersey. Went to Montclair High School, graduated Montclair High. But he had a band in high school that would play, uh, you know, I guess church dances, things like that. CYO, Catholic Youth Organization benefit dances, things like that. And then he one night was driving by my folks' house, uh, heard them jamming, introduced himself, eventually brought his mom over, Helen, and who played amazing boogie woogie piano,
Mm.
and then the rest was history. For a couple of years, he was my idol. He was like my older brother. I grew to love him and just wanted to be him. And and then literally, as he once he left for college, I started a band, and he would come back to Montclair usually every Thanksgiving and Christmas, and stop by my folks' house. And by the time of his second year in college, he had left college, I believe, and started the James Gang. So they got a record deal. He was touring with the James Gang, and he would come back to visit my folks, sit with my band, and show the guys in my band the real chords to Hendrix songs, to Led Zeppelin songs, to the Who songs. I mean, it was nuts. And literally, I think Joe's the single biggest reason that I decided as I was about to graduate high school that if he can do it, I can do it. And it took me a whole lot longer than it took him to get into, I guess, the tier of professional musicianship, recording and touring. But it was using him as the template that, I was around it. I saw how much work he put into it. And I tried to just keep going for that.
Hmm.
And so, in a nutshell, probably the most talented guy I knew when I was younger, still is. All his solo albums, all his work with the Eagles is just mind-boggling. Um,
Yeah.
and yet, most people don't know that, his mom, who was a piano teacher, classical piano teacher, she taught him how to really navigate the keyboards when he was young. So he had all that background. Then he migrated to guitar, and the rest is history. And it took a while. Somebody sent me a picture of him with the band called the Measles, who eventually became the James Gang. And
Mm.
Joe's on keyboards. He's not even on guitar. So,
Yeah.
and maybe on the picture he decided to take the guitar off, but he was a very accomplished keyboard player. Most people probably don't even think about that. But
Yeah. Well,
he was my template. It was like
for
Joe
sure.
Walsh, rock star. If he can do it, I can do it. So,
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of his, and yeah, no, his on his solo records he played all the keyboards, so and
so
there's quite a bit of it. So yeah, no, it is a good instrument for him.
yeah.
Now you were saying you're talking about like how, seeing Joe made you want to pursue music, and looking at your kind of career path, you didn't really start getting significant work until like the late 70s, early 80s, which by that point you already would have been in your late 20s. And it
Late
sort of
20s, yeah.
it
Yeah.
sort of feels like most people who go on to do big things in the music business are already in demand the moment they turn 18 or whatever.
Well, at
And
this point, yeah. Yeah.
so since it took longer for you, how did you like, just keep fighting to eventually get your foot in the door?
Um, so I moved to California for a couple of years in the early 70s, and really was in a bunch of bands. I knew Journey before their first album was put out. I knew the Tubes before anybody in the rest of the world knew who they were. Um, so I guess part of the problem was I was focused for a good, let's say it was 7 years from me graduating high school to me getting my first tour professionally. And in that 7 years, three and a half of it was out in the West Coast. And I was focused on trying to be a jazz rocker. Mahavishnu Orchestra had come out and blown the world apart. And uh, I wanted to I wanted to do that very extreme type of music. And I had it set in my mind that I didn't want to go play rock and roll. I wanted to play jazz rock. So I kept holding out, but I would join bands and we would do covers, or we would do half covers, half originals. We would record demos, and it was just slogging through, surviving, and holding this dream of uh, being able to be a jazz. We didn't even call it jazz rock back then. We just called it, I guess maybe fusion.
Yeah.
Uh, but I just kept holding on to that, and I was in dozens of cover bands, playing way too much. Uh, always dreaming of I'm going to get a job playing the more busy drums, and I eventually did. But I think that was probably the biggest drawback to my career was that I was just dead set on playing that music. And when I finally got my first tour, which was with Al Di Meola, and then joined Brand X the next year, it had already peaked. So by the end of the year I was with Brand X, I had to make all sorts of personal changes, business changes, and musical changes. So it was just pigheadedness and wanting to be able to do something with all the chops I always worked on and all the chops I love. I've called it lead drums for a long time because it's a completely different way of playing. It's freer, it's more challenging in many ways, but I held out, and I was lucky that I at least got to taste traveling and touring with Al Di Meola, and then the next year I joined Brand X, and that was by the time that year was over, I was ready to go back to rock and roll. And
Hmm.
I did. And I literally joined Hall Oates the next year, about a year and a half later. I played in a couple of other cover bands up in Canada. I was based in Toronto for 5, 6 months with a band that was run by a friend of mine named Dave Bendith, who is a great producer, recorder. He was a great guitar player and probably still is. But he's the one who owned House of Loud because he moved to New Jersey after meeting me. He came down, whatever. Long story. But by 1980, I had decided I got to go back to rock and
Hmm.
roll, and that's when things changed. I joined Hall Oates. I recorded on 2 records of theirs. I did one long tour in all of 1980, and then realized, you know what, this is really this is where I need to go. I need to
Yeah.
get back to songs, and I also did the occasional weird music recordings, like with Blue Öyster Cult or a couple other things. But
Mhm.
most of it has been, main like MOR rock. I don't know.
Yeah.
AOR, yeah,
Yeah.
AOR, the album.
AOR. Mhm.
Yeah, and yeah. So I think it was just being pigheaded and being resolute that I'm going to at least get to record once officially. And by the time we did the Brand X album, I was like, you know what? I got it out of my system. And it was a wonderful uh, finish to like 7 years of really, really barely making ends meet.
This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by Marvel Marketing. Marvel Marketing is an award winning digital marketing company headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, working with clients in different industries from all over North America, including Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Marvel Marketing services include website design and development, website maintenance, search engine optimization, public relations services, and social media management, amongst others. To find out more, visit marvelmarketing.ca. This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by Guitar Works. One of Canada's top independent music stores for over 30 years, Guitar Works carries a huge selection of musical instruments from the biggest brands in music, including Gibson, Fender, Martin, Yamaha, and Paul Reed Smith. Visit any of their 3 Calgary locations or shop online at guitarworks.ca and join the Guitar Perks program to earn money back with every purchase. Guitar Works, your total guitar store. This episode of Guess That Record is also brought to you by Recordland, home to the largest selection of music in Canada. Buy, sell, and trade tapes, CDs, and vinyl. Located in Calgary's Inglewood neighborhood on 9th Avenue Southeast, visit them in person or on Instagram at Recordland Calgary. Now, you mentioned Hall Oates. They were pretty much the first big band you worked for, and it was on the Voices album. Yeah.
Yep.
So I was kind of curious because I noticed that there was another drummer that played on that record. So
Murata.
yeah. So which tracks did you work on for
Only
that?
A couple. I played on Big Kids. I played on Lovin' Feelin', which ended up making it to the radio.
Right.
And what else did I do on that? I don't remember at the moment. It was only a couple of songs because the album had already primarily been done. They recorded, Jerry's just a god. And I was lucky they wanted to re-record Big Kids, which they had already done with Jerry, and they just wanted something more aggressive. And then Lovin' Feelin' was just a couple of takes, and that might have been one of the first recordings I did with them. And that ended up being like top 20. It was awesome. I finally heard myself on AM radio all over the New York area. And that tour changed my life. That was like being in the Beatles at times. Especially we went to Japan for the very first time in my life, and they were greeted like the Beatles. Like, there were girls everywhere, young girls everywhere. So
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool. And certainly that was something that didn't happen with all the fusion bands. So that was like, this is really awesome. I love working with Daryl and John. I don't remember. I think there's only 3 or 4 songs at the most. I did not play on Kiss on my list. I did not play on You Make My Dreams Come True. I was in the videos, but I didn't play songs. And we didn't know how to dress or anything. Whatever.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. It was the 80s, early 80s.
Yeah.
1980. So, yeah.
It's a very interesting time to join Hall & Oates, of course, because that was really when they exploded. Like they had been up and down for a couple of years, but once it turned to the 80s, they were the big thing. So yeah, cool time to be with them for sure.
They had a ton of hits off that first record. They had a ton of hits off the second record, and I parted ways with them through about halfway through the recording of the second record. Was that Private Eyes? Maybe, I think.
Yeah.
I'm on, I think, one song, which was just really a jam. I recorded most of the album, but it wasn't right for them. And it wasn't right for me. And we were like creatively butting heads. So it's like, you know what? It's great. I got a call from their manager, Tommy Mottola, and I had already set up an audition with another band called Balance. And so he calls, I got good news and bad news. We're going to retain you for a couple of weeks, but the boys really want to make a change. And I was like, and I want to call you. I was going to call you and say that I have a change. I have to leave. And I want to thank you. So it was a wonderful, you know, thank
Yeah.
you for your time. Goodbye.
Yep.
And oddly enough, I saw Daryl. Didn't see John, but I saw Daryl this past summer with Billy at Hyde Park.
Oh,
He
cool.
he opened up for us with his band, and I hadn't seen him since 1981.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. He didn't recognize me. I used to have hair then.
Right.
It was like I came running up to him. I was like, Daryl, Chuck Burgi. He was like, holy shit! So it was fun. It was really fun, and
Yeah.
I had the best time with them. And they were such cool guys, and learned an awful lot. So
Yeah. And another band that you, or artist, I guess, that you worked with in the 80s that's very well known is Meatloaf.
yeah,
And that was an interesting time to be with him because he was like totally dedicated to touring. But was it from a musical perspective, it had to have been fun to play that music in a live setting as a drummer because it's like this weird mix of like really complex classical music and like 50s rock and roll.
you bet. So the the meat of every show, no pun intended,
Mhm.
was the very first album, Back Bat Out of Hell. And so I got introduced to Meat through a guitarist friend of mine who I was in a couple of bands with, Bobby Kulick, and who unfortunately passed a couple of years ago.
Mm.
But uh, joining Meatloaf, I mean, that band from when I joined them till when I departed was just really at the pinnacle of the groups that I was fortunate enough to be a part of. I met my wife Amy there when I first went to the very first rehearsal here in New York. She and her sister had been living in Germany and had been working with the producer Frank Farian, who
Mm.
did the album that we started touring on, which was called "Blind Before I Stop." So it was recorded in Germany. They sang all the backgrounds. And then he, after working with them a couple of weeks, asked them to go on the road. So the Meatloaf thing was, I mean, we did stuff from a variety of albums. Trying to think. But it was super challenging. And to play that stuff right every night, uh, man, we would do 3-hour shows with him. And he was, when I joined him, he was on the biggest role of his life, notoriety wise, um, and his singing was at the peak. He had lost 100 pounds, and he was totally committed to not drinking, not smoking, leading a very healthy lifestyle. And we toured our brains out. I was with him for almost 6 years, and man, those 6 years are a blur because we were back and forth to Europe all the time. Towards the end of being with him, we started busting into the United States again, big clubs, smaller concert venues, and man, uh, you know, uh, playing that stuff to the best of my ability was the biggest challenge I had ever had up until that point, because I had to watch him all the time. You know, with like jazz rock, you're kind of there's no vocalist, so the drums are the conductor, but Meatloaf was the conductor. So on top of playing all these songs, I also had to watch him all the time for stops, starts, his dynamics, and the bass player also was a conductor with me since he had been with me a lot longer than I had.
Mm.
So it was a daunting task, daunting gig, and an incredibly fulfilling gig. Yeah.
For sure. And now moving ahead to like the main thing I wanted to ask you about, which of course is Billy Joel. The seed was planted for you to eventually get the job with Billy because you worked on the Billy Joel Broadway musical. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. I was the original drummer for that, and my old friend and great guitar player and musical director with Billy, Tommy Burns, um, yeah, asked me, would you want to come off the road because he knew, like himself, that I was a road dog, and be a part of a band on Broadway. He was like, let's give it a shot. So I was living in Manhattan at the time. No one else in the band did, but he ended up dragging in one of my favorite bass players, Greg Smith, um, who's out with the Guess Who right now.
Mm.
But just an amazing player. I worked with him in a variety of situations and albums. But he put a great band together. We auditioned for the producers, and the next thing we were on Broadway for almost 3.5 years.
Yeah.
So it was during that time that I would meet Billy sometimes once a week. A lot of times he would come up and play a curtain call, which was really the final post-show number. The dancers would sit around, take bows, and then sit while we jammed a Billy song. And yeah, it was like getting the gold ring on the carousel that had gone round and round for 3.5 years, and that was my only time on Broadway. And I can say that that was pretty much the same for most of the main band. They never went back and did another show, but God, that was just a mind-boggling experience, and
Hmm.
that's how I got to meet Bill, and I got to appreciate his music because I really had to learn. We learned more songs than we ended up using in the show, but it was the door into Billy's music that captured me. And by the time he asked me if I wanted to go on the road, it was like, "What are you kidding?" So, and
Yeah.
that's been almost over 18 years for me now. So
Yeah.
I'm like the kid in the band, along with our trumpet player. Some people have been there, like Mark Rivera, our sax player, 40 years.
Hmm.
So that's not
It's
the only thing he does, but yeah.
um were you a fan of Billy before
I
doing all
was,
this
I
stuff?
was, but because it's piano-driven music, I'm such a guitar freak that it was always in the background of my awareness.
Gotcha.
I appreciated him. I saw him early on in his career on things like on some of the like midnight special shows,
Hmm.
and then um, before before we did the tour, before I joined him rather, and before we even started the musical, I had seen him in the early '90s on the River of Dreams tour. Uh, my old friend Dave Rosenthal, who is now MD and has been with Billy since I think '92, invited us to a garden show,
Mm.
and I went, and that blew my mind. That was like, oh my God, Billy Joel is stupendous. He was still jumping around doing splits and flying off the keyboards and just a madman on stage, uh, and that kind of got me into who Billy was. But it
Right.
wasn't until I really started having to learn his stuff and play it for the Broadway show that I started appreciating the depth of who that guy is. He's
Hmm.
he's insane.
It's and it was pretty big shoes for you to fill when you did take over as his drummer because of course Liberty DeVito had been Billy's drummer since the mid 70s and played on all of those records. So like has your approach been to recreate, like play what Liberty was playing or do your own thing but keeping it familiar at the same time?
The short answer is eventually recreate Liberty. I think I made an enormous mistake when I first came in, thinking, yeah, I can change a lot of this stuff up.
Mm.
And it didn't work. And Yeah, Liberty was big shoes to fill. I thought he was an incredible player with all the songs that made it to record. Live, I thought he was incredibly exciting. Um, it just so happened that by the time I met Bill, he and Liberty were really growing apart on a lot of levels. Um, and it was, again, being at the right place at the right time. Um, I've never, I've never not thought about what his participation was and what the status of who he was in this band. I've never forgotten that. And I try and pay homage at this point to everything that was cool about what he did. I mean, most of it, there was nothing broken. So, you know, and it really isn't my job to do more There's a couple of things they've let me stick in shows now, um, but for the most part, it's an homage to him, and
Hmm.
it's an homage to his recordings and to the parts he's played. And I think that has helped uh, the people who grew up on that music like us live. Not that Billy needed any help, but I just try and bring a consistency of tempo. That was one of the things that I wanted to change when I joined him. He literally asked me, "So, what do you want to bring to this?" And my very first thing was, "I want to play your songs at album tempo."
Mm.
And he was like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah, because I've listened to a lot of the live stuff and I've seen you live, and I don't think you're being given the chance to sing most of your songs the way you should." And so he was like, "Well, let's try it at rehearsal." And we never look back. I still try and nail all those tempos, at least the songs that I start. And his time is so good that now we play everything every night. We don't have a click, we don't have anything pre-recorded, but there is a consistency because hopefully I've helped him get back his time, and I try and keep the songs the same tempo.
Hmm.
Uh, so it's really a recreation. It's an homage, and I don't think there's more to it than that.
Right.
It was all recorded. It was all done before I joined, and I did try and throw a lot of stupid stuff in, which didn't. It wasn't needed.
Right, of course. And now it's been interesting because, of course, you joined around 2005, 2006.
Hmm.
It's been interesting to sort of see how the gig has evolved because, of course, in 2014 you guys started the residency at Madison Square Garden, and so it's created a really unique touring schedule because you guys play at least one show at the Garden per month, and then
Yep.
usually another show in a different city. I
Yep.
imagine it's quite nice to be able to do that since it's still regular work, but you're not on the road for months at a time.
It's extraordinary.
Hmm.
And the only thing I have a complaint, and that's just from the physical perspective. I wish I played more. I mean, I work with a cover band that I have with my wife, and between that and taking care of my mom, I've had to really uh, dumb down my other musical projects. But for me, every gig is like getting shot out of a cannon, and there's no real ramp up, right?
Hmm.
I was watching a video of me with a band called Rainbow with Richie Blackmore. Somebody sent me a link to one of our last shows in Japan, and it was the end of a 7 month tour. And God, we were so good, and I remember that. I remember being able to get up on stage and feeling like I can play anything at any time at any speed not just this band's music, anything. I don't feel like that. I struggle to feel just capable of holding on to my sticks and playing the show. I work out here. I got a kit here. I usually put on the tempos to Billy's songs, and I'm happy if I can put an hour a day into the drums. But that's my only complaint. The rest of it is a dream beyond anybody's comprehension. We just played last week. We did a garden, and it was the coincidentally um, the anniversary of the Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
Yep.
But and this Friday we're playing our first show with Sting
Mm.
as a co billing. So and that'll be a stadium. And now they're on the road, man. Those guys are actually playing all the time, and I miss that. That's all I can say. I mean, I'm thrilled that we don't do that at this point in my life, but it's bittersweet because
Right.
as a drummer, my muscles I hurt so bad the next day. I know Billy does too. We've laughed about it a lot. You know, uh, we're busy doing what we do in life, and then we get up on stage and give 1,000,000% like we're 13 years old or 15, and that works. It's so exhilarating, but man, I'm shredded the next day, and
Right.
I know he is too. So that's the only downside for twice a month is not enough for
Mm.
me honestly, to feel confident and feel comfortable about getting up there and blasting through 2.5 hours. Uh,
That's yeah, that's a very interesting way to look at it, I think. But
I
yeah,
don't mean it to be negative. Billy treats us great, and it's really on a level that most people would just they'd be awed at how well treated we are, and just how much fun it is. Oh my God, it's working with Billy has been the best experience of my life. He's got only the best band. He's got the best crew. He's got the best business people. We're doing the best shows, and it's mind boggling.
for
It's mind,
sure.
yeah.
For
So
sure.
I'm blessed, but to maintain it is all the work that goes on behind the scenes. People think I just show up and like, yeah, let's just get on stage and rock. And I'm down here at least trying to sweat an hour a day, minimum,
Right. Right.
uh, just just to keep the muscles going. So
For
anyway,
sure. This is something I've been curious about for a long time because there are artists out there who will play in both stadiums and arenas on the same tour, like Paul McCartney, Bruce Springsteen, and obviously Billy also does both the stadium and arena shows simultaneously. My question is, do you guys use the same stage for the stadium shows that you would use at the Garden, or is it a completely different set of equipment?
we use the same stage. That
Mm,
same stage gets picked up and travels to the big shows, and then what happens is it gets padded out
right.
uh, to take up a bit more space. But the actual stage is the same. Billy has a gimbal that his piano sits on. That almost always travels with us. That was flown to Japan, I believe, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, yeah, I think it was because at least he can turn around.
Hmm.
So it's the same stage. It just gets padded out behind us and above us and to the side of us for the really big shows.
Right.
Uh, yeah, yeah,
Cool.
and that
Um,
makes a big difference.
yeah,
Everything's laid out. Everything's where you expect it to be, whether we're doing an arena or whether we're doing the big show. It's the same feel. Yeah,
that would, and I imagine that would, yeah, help with the preparation, depending on where you're playing. You can
yeah,
just sort of show
absolutely.
up and it's all the same.
All the same. All we do is sound check. We have an amazing audio crew, and sound check is usually just a lot of jamming and fun. Billy hates playing his stuff, but in any case, when we get up to a show, and it's the same layout every time, it makes for a cohesive vibe. You're not
Yeah,
like, oh my God, I don't have a sight line to Billy now or whatever.
right.
So they see to it that we get that same thing. Makes an enormous difference. And we also travel with our monitor board and our monitor guide, no matter what we do.
For sure.
So
Now, one of the many perks that comes with working with Billy Joel is the fact that quite often Billy will bring out special guests to his show.
yeah,
The most famous example would have to be when Paul McCartney showed up to the final concert at Shea Stadium. But
yes.
overall, you've had Bruce Springsteen, John Mellencamp,
Mhm.
Sting, and then of course you've also had those tours with Elton John as well. So like, who are the people that you've shared the stage with where you've just been like, I can't believe I'm playing with this guy right now?
Oh man, most of them. Okay,
Hmm.
so um, I lived in Manhattan for over 20 years and found out about the one and only classical station in New York City is called WQXR. I still have it on our house here. We can pick it up easily. But so I've been listening to classical for 30 plus years, and Itzhak Perlman was on every one of my favorite albums that featured a violin
Right.
for forever. He's one of them. Chick Corea. I've known Chick since I was right out of high school, and I was a huge fan of everything he did. So Chick's another one. Joan Jett, Sting. I mean, the Police had such an impact on me, and Sting was at the time working on his Broadway show and came up to sit in with us. Um, God, I mean, Bruce. I had met Bruce through things we did with Billy, like whatever. Bruce, I mean, really, it's a litany of people. I remember the day that Peter Frampton sat in with us. We had to learn two of his biggest songs. And he was up on stage already talking to some of the band. And I came up and I just interrupted. And I was like, Humble Pie at the Fillmore East, 1970. I can't believe I get to play with you now after all these years.
Yeah.
And we hugged and wow, it was just, oh my God. I mean, it goes on and on. The list has done nothing but grow. Richie Sambora, I met all those guys when I played on Johnny's first record as a sideman. And John sat in with us. It's you know I think you can throw everybody in that list that has actually been our guest. They're all, including Elton. I grew up on Elton. You know, loving his very first album, loving that band when they put out that live trio record, quartet, bass, drums, guitar, 1970. It's a live show, and so to be on tour with him, actually talking backstage with him, it's just like, what? This is so nuts. So at Shea, getting a chance to talk and play Walk This Way with Steven Tyler. Right. I mean, we did My Generation with Roger Daltrey and Dale. I was just going through those. I have all these computers with, pictures I haven't condensed into one folder. And I was like, oh my God, I got these shots of me with Roger. I haven't seen him. I haven't showed him to anybody. But God, it's crazy. It's everybody that I've played with is pinch myself. They're actually here on stage, whether it was like Lou Gramm and
Mick Jones.
Mick Jones, we did Urgent. We did, I forget the other one. Anyway, yeah, every one of those guests, I'm sitting there, just my mouth is like, and realizing that I'm doing my best to play your song at the tempo that you like, and to hopefully we're going to play it right. And I'm getting to hear you, the voice of my past. And that goes on down the line. It's crazy. Yeah. So I can't really. I mean, Paul McCartney's got to be the biggest. We didn't really think that was going to happen at Shea, and when it did, I just thought my head was going to explode. I was like, this is the biggest circle being completed for me in my life, because he was the guy. I wanted to be a bass player before I wanted to be a drummer. And then here he is guesting with us, finishing up what was a 3-hour freaking show of one of the hottest days ever. But yeah, so yeah. I don't know. That's not necessarily an answer. It's just I can't stop gushing about all our guests because every one of them was just like, you've got to be kidding.
No,
Steve, just like playing the Joker and God, crazy. And all those people were just the sweetest folks. I mean, I don't know what they're like to work with, but as guests and meeting them and Tony Bennett, Felix Cavalier from the Rascals, it goes on, man. And every one of them has had such an enormous impact on my love of rock and roll. So
yeah,
having them on the same stage has been mind-boggling.
For sure. Yeah, no, that's it's just it would be incredible to get to do that. So it's definitely great. Now this is something I would love to know. Top 5 Billy Joel songs.
Lullaby. He doesn't do it much. Allentown. Mm-hmm. I don't know why Allentown.
You can do top 3 if you can't think of 5.
Well, I mean, it's really hard. Just the Way You Are.
Mm-hmm.
And So It Goes.
Mm.
Whenever that's a solo song. So whenever I come off stage, I've always got him in my in-ears, and I might take a break for a second, and that makes me cry every time he sings it. Not sure why, but to me, that's the point of a song like that. and it and Lullaby, I have to like go somewhere and just kind of cry in private because that's what those songs do to me. I
Hmm.
don't know why. Allentown, my folks met during the war, um, and some of the lyrics about the USO and the plight of the miners and the plight of that town, Allentown, which my father-in-law lives in Bethlehem,
Mm.
I've gone through Allentown very often over the last 20 years, and that song's always just crushed me. I don't know why. The lyrics, the chord progressions. So that's four, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, and out of his rocking things, when we play, to me, the hardest songs to play for of his are the ones that have all this emoting going on. It's not so. Vienna is another
Mm.
top five or six for me, and it's not it's settling into his, the the vibe of that song, which I think it's a perfect recording. I don't try and do anything but play it right, and
Hmm.
sit with him to get through this incredible piece of music. Just the way you are, it's the same way. It's a very daunting drum track, very simple but not easy.
Mm.
But I end up playing it a little heavier because we're doing it in bigger places, so can't be as intimate as it was. Great thing that Lib and whoever else, I'm sure Phil Ramone helped refine his idea. But it's a hard song to play, and it's playing with him singing it. It's just like, oh my God, no wonder this has been. Oh, and New York State of Mind. That's another one. That's just God, you've got to be kidding. This guy wrote this song, and
Yeah.
I'm going to play it correctly, whenever we do it.
Hmm.
So I think that's over five. Uh, I'll sit with those for now
Sure.
because they have so much emotional meaning to me. And like I said, some of them, it's not about the technicality, um, or but it's the drum track, it's the song, it's the lyrics. Honesty is another one. We almost never do honesty, and I saw this guy Rick Beato, who's got
Mm.
a great channel on YouTube, do a deep dive on that song. And after he did that, I was like, I forgot. We never do it. I don't know why, but we never do it. It was a big hit for Billy, and it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
The chords, it's a perfect song, and so we played that in Japan, and I was just like, why don't we do this song more? It was just an overwhelming moment to play it the first time in 2 years or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah,
And, it's quite timely having you on the podcast because just a couple weeks ago, Billy released a new song, Turn the Lights Back On,
we
which,
did it for the first time at the Grammys.
yeah, and he hasn't done anything new in so long. And I think like that's one of the most fascinating things about Billy is that he, hasn't put out an album since River of Dreams, which is 93, yet
Yeah,
he still is one of the top concert draws out there.
yep.
So, and so it's, of course, you've just been playing the older stuff, which there's nothing wrong with that, but has it been fun to sort of add a brand new song to the set list now?
Absolutely, it's a ballad, and it's still so. The band didn't have anything really to do with the making of that song. It was a young producer who reached out to Bill, so we're still making the transition from learning what it was for a record and integrating it into our live set. So we've only played it once live. We did it at the last Garden show, and for me it's a work in progress because we're still working on taking the ideas of and what the basic recording sounds like and trying to make it something that we feel comfortable with without changing it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
You know, um, it's a beautiful song. Billy, we're all getting used to it. Billy's still getting used to singing it live, and yeah, I mean, just if you had told me 2 years ago, you're gonna be on the Grammys with a brand new song, and you're gonna be trying to integrate this brand new thing, I would have said there was no way, because Billy was so dead set on anything new. It was like,
Mhm.
what? Didn't I write enough hits? And every time he looked at me, I was like, no, no, no. We can't play all the cool songs you've written. So, yeah, you don't have to do another song. But he found it in, and it's been serendipitous. It worked out great, and I think it's been. Um, I think fans new and old both love it. So can't ask for more.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of like a couple months ago when when they did that new Beatles song, and how like, there hasn't been anything new from the Beatles in so long. And then, we got something new from Billy Joel too. It's a good
Absolutely.
time right now.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
I saw the video to that, which is really wild. I don't know if you've seen it yet or not, where they morphed him through the different years
Yeah.
and different looks singing the song. I
Hmm.
thought that was very impressive. So anyway,
It was interesting. So I know about the video and how they used like AI to kind
yep.
of de-age him, I guess. But I saw someone took the song and using AI made it so that it was young Billy Joel singing the song, like from the 70s.
Well, that's
And
part of the video.
yeah, but it was
Yeah.
like they synthesized his voice using AI to make it sound
Oh,
like it
wow. Make
was
it sound like 30
like,
years ago, 40
yeah,
years ago.
exactly. So
Wow.
that was kind
Wow.
of weird, but
Yeah.
yeah. Anyways, we are now entering the guessing section of the podcast.
Excited. All right.
So I'll explain the rules for you and any new listeners we may have out there. In this bag is a record that I have pulled from my collection. So I will give you 3 clues about this album, and then we'd play a game of 20 questions to try and figure out what the album is. And don't worry if you get stuck, I will give you hints at any time. So, Chuck Burgi, are you ready to guess that
I
record?
am. Oh, my God. Come on down.
All right, here are your 3 clues. This album was released in the 1960s. It was a landmark album in the development of psychedelic rock, and it had different versions in both the UK and the US. Question 1.
Hmm. Well, is it an album by a guitarist?
Yes. Question 2.
Could it be the Are You Experienced album by Jimi Hendrix?
Hold on. It was Are You Experienced?
Yes! Well,
Yes.
you've stacked the deck for me, because that's one of the artists that I probably know the most about. I was a Hendrix freak. I was lucky enough to see him in the band probably a dozen times in my youth.
Mm,
They were the very first concert I ever saw. And thank you. That
yeah.
was easy,
Yeah.
because when you said uh, different versions, uh, first of all, they had different album covers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I think the UK album is black and a shot of the band, as opposed to that fisheye shot, which I always found mesmerizing.
Hmm.
And then they had different songs. They
Yes.
had different songs that were released in England versus here. There were songs like Stars That Play with Laughing Sam's Dice. There was Stone Free.
Hmm.
And those weren't a part of the first album when it was released over here. I found out about those like a year later. We were, my friends and I, we had a band in high school, and the Experience and Cream were it.
Yeah.
We were a really good Hendrix cover band.
Awesome.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, before we dive into the discussion here, I'll give a few facts about the album for those who may not be familiar with it. Are You Experienced is the debut studio album from the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Released on May 12th, 1967 in the UK and August 23rd of that year in the US, the album features some of Jimmy's best-known tracks, including Purple Haze, Hey Joe, and Foxy Lady. And now, before we talk about that album specifically, I was reading. So, of course, you mentioned, they were your first concert. You saw them a bunch of times. I was reading that you went to Woodstock and saw them there.
I did. I actually, but so I was there all 3 days. Didn't sleep for 3 days. Lost my sleeping bag Saturday afternoon. So Saturday night there was no way I was going to sleep. I actually, me and the guys I was with were so exhausted that we actually left during Jimmy's set, because it wasn't really the experience.
The
It was like
bigger group.
it was a
Yeah.
bigger group, percussion, and Mitch was on drums still, but he was actually morphing into what would become the Band of Gypsies type of thing, a more R&B type of thing. And I had already seen the experience like about 10 times by that point, and we were like, you know what? So had everybody else I was with, because we were all huge fanatics. So we left during his set because people were still checking it out, and we were shot. We had to find a car and drive the hour and a half home, and hopefully take a bath for the first time in 4 days, and eat some food for the first time in 4 days. It was a long ordeal. I would we'd do it again in a heartbeat, but I'd have to be 16 years old.
Right. That's amazing. So you're the first person I've ever met that was actually at Woodstock. So that's like,
well, Billy went to Woodstock too.
Oh, really?
I come to find that he didn't stay the 3 days. I mean, I didn't even make it the full third day, but he drove his bike up at the time, and he parked it, locked it up, and caught a couple of bands on the outskirts. I don't even think he paid to get into the giant crowd. He kind of observed it from afar, and it was nothing he wanted to be a part of. I don't know if it was even Friday night or Saturday, but after it rained on Saturday, Woodstock was a mess.
Yeah.
And I think by that point he was already on his way back down too. I don't even know if he stayed the night, but we've talked about it a couple of times. And it changed my life. It totally changed my life, and I'm thrilled I was a part of that. But damn,
yeah,
was an ordeal.
And that's like got to be crazy. So if I have been lucky. I've seen the guitar that Jimmy played at Woodstock. It's at the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle, and I've been there a few times. So
several times, you bet.
Yeah, so I've been lucky to see the guitar he played, but like, to actually be there, it's kind of crazy because that, especially like with Jimmy playing the Star Spangled Banner, that's such a iconic moment that you still hear. And it's got to be kind of wild to see stuff from Woodstock and just think like, I was there. I remember that.
There were so many great artists, and one of the best isn't even in the movie, and I don't think is even on the record, and that's Sly and the Family Stone.
They were filmed, actually, yeah.
They were filmed, but I don't think they're a part of the film, because Sly wanted, pay me, and pay my band for it. And they were like, no, it's not how this deal's going to work. And he was like, then you can't use us. But I had already seen them a bunch of times too, and they were an extraordinary group.
For sure.
I double bill at the Fillmore East in 1970, I think, a year after Woodstock, and it was Sly and the Family Stone opening up for Jimi Hendrix.
Wow, yeah, that's an exciting show. Now back to the matter at hand, which was Are You Experienced? It's such an important album because, of course, it introduced the world to Jimi Hendrix, and you would have, of course, been right at the right age to take it in. So, yeah, do you remember like the first time you heard it?
I most certainly do. The guitarist in my band, his folks had a really cool big stereo, and he was the one that went out and bought the record. I remember putting it down and listening to Purple Haze, and just like, oh my God, what is that? You have no idea that disturbed my being like seeing the Beatles. That the first Jimi Hendrix album.
Yeah.
It was, and then very soon after listening to the whole album, we found out that they were going to be performing at Hunter College in Manhattan and a friend of ours, dad, was willing to take us in, wait for us, and pick us up and take us back, and uh, that would have been '67.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Wow.
that was the fall of '67, and I tell you, so I listened to that record almost back to back, front, first and second sides, almost every day for 3 years.
Awesome.
Uh,
Yeah.
Couldn't get enough of it, and then once I saw them play, back then there was no YouTube, there were no videos of how
Hmm.
to do shit. It was the guitarists in my band were being shown by Joe Walsh whenever he got home how Jimmy played certain things, and then I just was able to. I've got a good eye for. I'm an okay artist, but I would watch somebody play, and just by doing that, I could then listen to the album again and image. Oh, when he's doing this thing here. That's what he's doing,
Yeah.
and I learned from watching, and I really developed my ear that way because it was the only wearing out a record, pulling it back to the top, having an old crappy pair of headphones, listening to it, and then sitting on my drums and trying to figure out what the hell is he doing. Anyway, so that album, I can't talk about its impact enough. It,
Mm.
it 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 was formative.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
I'm a guitar player. So, of course, Jimmy was very influential for me. But, I've always tried to, like, when I'm introducing someone to Jimi Hendrix, and if they're a drummer, I always try and say, listen to Mitch Mitchell, because he might be the most underrated drummer in rock history. So, I have to imagine that was a draw for you as well, that
Oh
Mitch
God!
was
Oh
that
my
good.
God! He was that good.
Hmm.
Um, uh, yeah, he was groundbreaking. There was really nobody like him, and that band. If you listen to any of those records, but especially Are You Experienced, if you put that on now, it still sounds like it's in the future. To
Hmm.
me, it sounds like a band that has yet to come to Earth, like it exists in some just like crazy place.
Yeah.
Uh, it's so the lyrics, the sounds, the playing is so developed. Uh, I mean, not everybody's. I feel like it's taken me, my whole life to 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 have some dominion over my playing. But there are other drummers, for instance, like Mitch, like John Bonham, uh, that their first recording, when you hear them, it's like they're fully formed.
Yeah.
They have all their personality, all their chops, and the first Led Zeppelin album. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. That screwed me up, and every other drummer too. It's his footwork alone,
Yeah.
and so it was a divine time to be influenced and growing up, and that's why that classic rock is still so powerful because those guys, they were coming from another world,
Hmm.
and it just worked.
Yeah.
It just freaking worked. So yeah, are you
It's
experienced?
it it's interesting as we were talking about because it did have a different version for the UK and the US, and that was quite common at that time, well, in the 60s, because of course the Beatles and the Rolling Stones had to
Did it
deal with
too, and
that.
the Rolling Stones did that too. Yeah,
Yeah. And
yep.
I know the Beatles were the one that kind of ended it because when they re-signed with EMI in 1967, that was one of their demands, was that we want our albums standardized. So
And
Are You Experienced is probably like the last major album that had to deal with that. And it's funny because the first time I listened to it was on CD, and what they've done is they've combined all the songs into one package on the CD
yeah,
version. So I didn't have like that, the hearing songs a year later or whatever. But I do actually think the American, if you compare the two versions, the American one is the stronger version just because it had Purple Haze, it had Hey Joe, The Wind Cries Mary. So yeah, I think it was the better version of the two for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. Well, in retrospect, things like Stone Free and
Red
Laughing Star
House.
and Red House, they were great, but they were kind of the fillers
Hmm.
for the British release.
Yeah.
They were like more filler songs, and I thought the American release is just one amazing cut after another, and
Hmm.
so I agree with
Yeah. And songs do you think are like the ones that like are your favorites from this record?
you. Okay. I Don't Live Today.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, Foxy Lady.
Yeah.
Um, Manic Depression.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Oh my God! What a drumming tour de force, as well as uh, and uh, and Are You Experienced? Uh, that I had never heard that, and that was one of those songs I'd never heard. Two drum tracks, one played in reverse at times.
And a reverse guitar solo as well
Reverse
on that
guitar
track.
solo. It's oh my God! I
Yeah.
mean, that to this day, you put that recording on and listen to it on headphones. What he's saying to you is, "Have you ever, have you ever been experienced? I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Check it out."
Yeah.
And and back in 1967, it was just like, what is going on? Anyway, so those are a couple of standouts. I think the whole record's ridiculous.
Hmm.
Uh, Hey Joe, each of those tracks has got stuff happening just on the drums that
Hmm.
are that it took me years to figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
Lot of chops, man. A lot of serious speed. A lot of a lot of a lot of stuff going on that it, I went down that rabbit hole very, very deeply. And every time I learned more, I was even more impressed with who Mitch was at a really young age, coming in to play with Jimmy.
Yeah.
And then I read books and about really it was done quickly. Those guys didn't have, you know, I mean, they
They
were given an opportunity to record until they made themselves happy, but that wasn't a long process.
hmm Well,
They,
they did Access Bold as Love in the same year. So,
yeah,
yeah. It's I played a lot of this stuff with like my high school bands.
yeah.
Songs like Fire, Manic Depression, and Hey
Mhm.
Joe. And Manic Depression is such an interesting song because it is in 3/4. And so it's technically a waltz, even though it's just chaos, which is
Yeah,
quite interesting.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And it's a very hard song to play. I mean,
Hmm.
I've had guys go, "Yes, yeah, I can play that," and it's just like, yeah, you're not swinging it in three. You're kind of bobbling through 4/4 there. It's a fast waltz.
Hmm.
Uh, Also, just on the one real song that goes way out is Third Stone from the Sun.
Yeah.
And that is where Mitch starts to flex his jazz chops. I mean, he flexes them in every song, but in a rock context, he actually starts playing the straight ahead dan 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 dan, and and that is where I started listening um, to his hero, who I eventually read about, which was Elvin Jones. He
Mm.
started getting back into the straight ahead, and I went down that rabbit hole for years. I thought I was going to be a jazz drummer for at
Right.
least a couple of years,
Yeah.
and that was kind of in reverse. Loving Mitch, hearing about. In fact, first year out of high school, I studied with Elvin.
Mm.
Uh, for what it's worth, I mean, he was such a wild man,
Yeah.
but I had to know and be around Mitch's hero. He was the one guy that Mitch spoke about whenever he was interviewed. Well, who are your influences? He'd be like, well, Elvin Jones. Like, shit,
Mm.
I gotta know about this. So I ended up
Cool.
being Elvin's roadie for about 4 months,
Cool. Nice.
first year of high school. So
Nice.
yeah, and then at the end of that, I realized, what am I thinking? I will never play straight ahead bebop music like he does, and he was barely making a living.
Right.
Anyway,
Cool.
changed my life.
Awesome. Well, we have reached the end of the interview. I want to thank Chuck Burgi for taking the time to appear on Guess That Record. Like I said, I'm a huge Billy Joel fan. It's so cool to get to speak with someone that works with him and it has the experience that you have. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Jackson, my pleasure. If you want to do anything like this again, I'm so down. You're a pleasure to work with, to talk with, and knowledgeable as all hell. So I appreciate that. And thank you for picking the Experience album because, I can't, for kids nowadays, if there's one album and you are a guitar player, I would say you got to hear Are You Experienced?
Of course.
Um,
Yeah.
and for me, it was a rabbit hole that I've never stopped going down. And Billy's the same thing. Billy's a huge Hendrix fan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, so that.
Yeah.
But I have so many stories. I'll be happy to do something else just about Billy in the future. I can't talk about that job, that man, that person, that musical legend enough. I'm so grateful and enthusiastic about being a part of his musical world.
For sure. Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks to you, the listeners, for tuning in. Your support allows us to keep bringing on amazing guests, so it's greatly appreciated. Make sure to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen, and tell your friends to check us out. If you'd like to see the video versions of these interviews, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We also just put together a playlist on Spotify called The Music of Guess That Record, which features the songs discussed on the show. It will be updated after each new episode, so give it a like if you'd like to get a feel for the music we talk about. Lastly, you can follow us on Instagram at Guess That Record. Remember to keep rocking, and we'll see you on the next episode of Guess That Record.